The path of least resistance is a principle I learned while studying respiratory therapy, and it has been a core piece of knowledge for me ever since. It's not just about how air flows through the lungs, it applies to almost everything in life. And right now, it is the fundamental mechanism driving the biggest medical and cultural crisis of our time. I'm fascinated by the psychology of it. Most adults, if you ask them, will readily admit what they need to do. They need to exercise, they need to sleep more, they need to eat real food. They know the basics, but they don't do it. And this is where the system exploits our vulnerability, because it's easier to believe there is something fundamentally wrong with you that has to be fixed by medicine. It's easier to accept the narrative that you are a victim of a chemical deficiency than it is to quietly do the life things that would eventually produce better results. To truly choose the hard path, you have to admit you are the problem getting in your own way, and that takes tremendous personal courage. The problem is our modern culture has made that courage almost impossible to find. The landscape is confusing, not only because the pharmaceutical and medical industries have created a confusing narrative, but because the basics of life, cooking skills, movement, emotional regulation, are no longer modeled or part of our shared community. The confusion is, I believe, by design. That is the environment that allowed companies like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly to step in. They have successfully framed the problem as purely chemical so that their high-cost, lifelong injection is the natural, easy, and immediate choice. It is the perfect, profitable path of least resistance around the messy, non-scalable issues of stress, trauma, and a basic lack of skill. And this is what I've been repeating. You can't buy yourself through the basics. The pattern is very clear as it was with opioids. Create the problem, provide the solution, and let astronomical profits drive the entire narrative. This is the story of how a multi-trillion-dollar industry bought the medical definition of a disease to sell you a dependency, and in doing so, stripped away your autonomy. To understand this betrayal, you have to look past the symptoms and follow the money. We opened this conversation by talking about that deep internal psychological struggle, the fact that it is always easier to believe there is something fundamentally wrong with you that has to be fixed by medicine than to quietly admit that you were the problem getting in your own way. This is the victim narrative, and it is structurally cheaper than doing the hard work of living. But where did that victim narrative come from? It wasn't organic. It was bought. The entire financial engine behind the GLP-1 craze, companies like Eli Lilly, which recently became the first drug maker in history to hit $1 trillion valuation, and Novo Nordisk, is built on one non-negotiable strategic necessity. You can't sell a high-cost, lifelong drug for a condition that isn't officially classified as a chronic disease. So what do? Instead of investing in decades of public health education to change our food system or help people with their life skills, they simply invest in changing the rules of the game. This is the path of least resistance for them. The goal was to take a complex, multi-factor human issue involving diet, stress, sleep, community, trauma, and flatten it into a single, simple, insured chemical problem. The key structural moment in the United States was the American Medical Association's controversial 2013 decision to officially define obesity as a disease, a move that immediately opened the door for massive insurance coverage and drug pathways. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. We know that groups like the International Obesity Task Force, which was instrumental in pushing that global shift, had historically relied on drug industry sponsors for up to 2/3 of their total funding for years. They're promoting the idea of obesity as a serious medical condition while taking millions from the companies that make the only profitable solutions for it. This financial engineering becomes a profound moral crisis when you look at how it influences the most vulnerable, children. In the US, recent guidelines aggressively endorse these powerful drugs for children as young as 12. And the money trail was laid bare for anyone willing to look. The organization that published those guidelines, the American Academy of Pediatrics, was found to have received at least $2 million from manufacturers like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. And the deeper betrayal, nearly a quarter, 22% of that organization's executives received personal payments for things like travel, meals, and consulting work. The implication is devastating. The medical definition of a disease, the justification for a high-cost, lifelong intervention, is being written by people who are taking direct payments from the companies that will profit from the prescription. They didn't just invent a drug. They found an off-label use and then successfully bought the definition of the disease to create a mandatory, lifelong customer base. This is the structural foundation of the betrayal, and it's how the system ensures that the most difficult, complex problems are replaced by the most convenient, profitable path of least resistance. The economics of the GLP-1 market are not new. They are a direct and frankly chilling sequel to one of the most criticized business models in modern pharmaceutical history, the pricing of insulin. To understand the scale of this moral failure, you have to go back to the beginning. The discoverers of insulin were ethically opposed to profiting from the miracle drug. But the ethical ideal immediately hit a wall of industrial reality. Although the University of Toronto labs were brilliant at discovery, they could not scale the production to purify and distribute the drug efficiently, leading to a devastating insulin famine in 1922 as patients around the world waited. Under immense pressure to save lives, the university was forced to compromise its vision. They turned to Eli Lilly and Company, who had the industrial capacity they lacked, and in May 1922, before the patent was legally finalized, the university licensed Eli Lilly the exclusive right to mass-produce the drug for the U.S. market. This pragmatic decision, made out of sheer desperation, is the precise moment a public asset was first steered toward corporate control. After striking this deal with Lilly, that the discoverers formally sold their patent to the University of Toronto for a symbolic $1 in 1923, intent on keeping the medicine in the public domain. However, the corporate dependency was already established. Fast forward to the 21st century, and that drug, specifically Eli Lilly's Humalog, was being sold for over $275 per vial in the United States, despite costing the manufacturer only an estimated $2 to $4 to make. As the technology evolved from the original animal-based insulin to synthetic human and analog insulin, other global pharmaceutical giants, notably Novo Nordisk and Sanofi, secured their own market share through licensing and developing their own patented versions. This led to a de facto monopoly by the Big Three. This wasn't just corporate drift, it was a deliberate strategy. Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi, who controlled 90% of the market, were accused of working in lockstep for years, engaging in a practice critics called shadow pricing, to inflate the list price by as much as 700%. The cost of this model wasn't just financial, it was fatal. You've likely heard the stories of Americans like 26-year-old Alex Smith, who died after rationing the insulin he couldn't afford because the monthly cost had ballooned to over $1,300. The company was quite literally profiting on the life or death dependence of its customers. The dependency is the product. It's after hearing the story of insulin and Alex Smith that we arrive at the chilling truth. The economics of the GLP-1 market are not a new innovation, but a deliberate sequel to the most criticized business model in modern pharmaceutical history. The system has learned that the greatest profits are found not in a cure, but in dependency. The GLP-1 drug market, driven by the demand for anti-obesity medications, is projected to reach a staggering $100 billion globally by 2030. That financial engine guarantees that the solution for chronic human struggle will always be the profitable, chemical one, never the difficult, systemic, or lifestyle one. This massive economic incentive is what I call the systemic betrayal of complexity. What does that betrayal look like in your life? It means that the focus on the pill or the injection becomes a deliberate distraction from the necessary, non-scalable basics. Think about the basics we've discussed. No drug can teach someone how to shop on a budget, how to cook whole foods, or how to emotionally manage a difficult day without reaching for comfort food. These drugs promise to relieve the struggle of appetite, but they do nothing to address the struggle of poverty, lack of sleep, chronic stress, or the lack of an exercise routine. These are the elements that build long-term health and autonomy. The $100 billion global market ensures that every new guideline, every policy discussion, and every mainstream media article will steer your focus away from the difficult, non-sellable basics and toward the profitable, lifelong, and external chemical solution. The system wants people to be confused and to fail at the basics, because failure guarantees a customer for life. We've established that the system has successfully bought the definition of the disease, changing obesity from a complex problem into a simple chemical one. But what does that mean for the person who actually sits in the doctor's office? The drug works by targeting key areas, increasing satiety and slowing gastric emptying. In essence, it silences the physical signal of hunger. This is where the surface-level recommendations in the mainstream media stop talking. But you and I know that hunger is only one small factor in what makes people obese. The struggle isn't just physical, it's emotional. The addiction to food is probably the worst addiction because, as we know, you have to engage with it every single day. People eat when they are not hungry. They eat because they are bored. They eat because they are lonely. They eat to cope with stress. Or they eat because their nervous system is constantly stuck in overdrive. They're not generally reaching for a carrot stick when they eat either. The system is taking a complex, multi-factor human problem, a problem that is about stress, a problem that is about stress management, psychological health, sleep discipline, and emotional regulation, and they're solving it with a chemical shortcut. The hard work of true health is not in resisting hunger. It's in sitting with the discomfort, the non-scalable, non-sellable difficulty of building a resilient life. And this is where the medical system, which is overwhelmed and structurally broken, becomes a willing accomplice. It's what I talked about in a previous episode where I noted that the system has lost its tolerance for difficulty and struggle. The doctors are not malicious, but they are stuck in a broken loop. They don't have time for the complex solution. They only have time for what I call the only lane the system actually has time for. The drug becomes a tool to silence the conversation between your brain and your body. It's the modern version of what we used to do when surgeons would cut the vagus nerve to stop acid production in your stomach, only to find that when you silence that internal communication, entire systems fall out of balance. The ultimate consequence is the loss of autonomy. The chemical offers to buy you out of the problem, but it never forces you to earn the solution. The moment you try to reclaim control and stop the medication, the moment you stop outsourcing it, you realize you never built the internal tools and the problem comes rushing back. And that brings us to the core of this whole structure, because that chemical way out, that outsourcing of your internal struggle, comes with a price tag, and it's designed to be permanent. The patient becomes metabolically weaker than they were before, which only reinforces their dependency on the chemical to maintain a loss. It also reinforces that core phrase, you can't buy yourself through the basics. The easy solution creates new, complex problems that the patient is now forced to manage. A hidden tax on the easy fix, so to speak. We are seeing this pattern repeatedly. The FDA has now required all GLP-1 drug labels to be updated to include the risk of serious acute kidney injury. This is not because the drug itself poisons the kidneys, but because the common side effects of nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea can lead to severe dehydration. The chemical solution, in its attempt to offer an easy fix, creates a new, high-risk requirement. The patient must constantly manage those severe GI symptoms and stay perfectly hydrated to avoid a catastrophic kidney event. The system has outsourced the hardest struggle to a profitable injection, but it demands that the patient assume all of the risk. So where does this leave us? We've traced the money from the $1 corporate patent sale of insulin to the $100 billion global GLP-1 market. We've seen how the medical definition of a disease was bought and paid for to create a mandatory lifelong customer. And we've seen how the easy chemical fix creates a systemic betrayal of complexity, replacing the difficult work of human adaptation with a dependency. The ultimate price of that chemical shortcut is not just the $1,300 per month Alex Smith couldn't afford. It's the price of autonomy. The system wants you to believe that your body is a failure and that the solution must be external, permanent, and profitable. It's an elegant, effective business model because it outsources all the risk to you and keeps the profits for them. But human beings are not designed to be managed by chemical inputs. We are built to adapt. We are built to struggle, to repair, and to grow. The hard work is not in buying the injection. The hard work is sitting with the discomfort. It's in learning how to cook a simple meal after a terrible day, how to walk away from the pantry when you're just bored, and how to build the muscle mass that makes you metabolically resilient. It's about building the internal tools, not outsourcing the job. Because no matter how advanced the chemistry gets, the principle remains. You can't buy yourself through the basics. The only true rebellion against a $100 billion system designed for your confusion and failure is the quiet, daily, non-sellable work of reclaiming your autonomy. That work is difficult, and it is necessary. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Is the medical system betraying complexity, or is it simply being pragmatic? Are we as a culture losing our tolerance for the struggle that leads to real growth? If this episode made you pause, if it challenged your assumptions about the path of least resistance, take a moment to do one of these 3 things. Like this episode, share it with someone you know who is grappling with these issues, and maybe subscribe to the channel. Your engagement is the only way we can counter a narrative backed by $100 billion. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next one.